Are you saving or using God's instruction book? You know, let me do this without this headset. Looks kind of interesting to see that way. You know, without the proper instructions, I wouldn't know how to use a headset. I would have never been able to hook up this computer and hook up the microphones and the cameras and test the sound and test the recordings and use the programs that were given to me. You know, you'll be like, oh, I should just be able to do this right out of the box. That was the furthest thing that I could ever have thought to do. You know, the sad part is that I've had the software to do this for quite some time. God had called me, you know, a couple of decades ago. And I've been paying for the renewal of this piece of software and the technology for most of the stuff that I'm using for about the same amount of time. But because of my fear and, you know, my reluctancy to listen and do what God asked me to do, it's taking me up to this point. Should have been a couple of decades ago. Can't really say that I've wasted 20 years plus of my life by not doing what God's called me to do. I think I've done some things, but not to the point of this. Not to the point of where I'm trying to share with you what God shares with me, and He's giving me the insight to talk to you about the instruction book. You know, most of us, when we buy a piece of furniture, and let's just say you buy a big cabinet, you know, it's got doors on it and all kinds of shelves and little nooks and stuff like that. And you have it delivered and they bring it into the garage or wherever your work area may be. And, you know, you look at the box for a moment and you go, you know, does it have a, you know, this side up, or have I got it reversed in the way that I'm supposed to unpack it, or is there a right or wrong way to unpack it? But then when we finally make a decision to open the box and look at all the big pieces, because that's pretty much what we're going to see at first, because most of the smaller pieces and packages and envelopes and stuff that are inside of this box are going to be not necessarily buried, but in between other things. They may not be. They may be at the top in another little small box, and when you move it, you can kind of shake it and hear all the little nuts and bolts and attachments and stuff rattling around in it. But you know, the hardest part about putting something together like that is trying to figure it out. And I know in my case, when I put things together, I kind of wondered, did they give me everything that I needed? Did they leave anything out? Well, if I'm willing to take the instruction booklet and look in it from, you know, first page to the last, probably more the first page than the last, there should be information in there explaining to me the contents of the box and how each one of those parts are labeled, and whether they're labeled with numbers or letters and numbers, or numbers or letters, whichever it may be. The instruction manual or the instructions to build it are put together, assemble it, you know, you can call it whatever you want, are outlined properly, you know, how many screws, how many bolts, how many connectors, how many panels, shelves, hooks, whatever there may be in there. And if we're being responsible enough and not just going, oh, this is good, they wouldn't have slided me on any parts, or they wouldn't have missed anything, then I think we're being a little bit overconfident, and we're hoping for a little bit of luck, and we're thinking that our common sense is going to help us put together without making sure that we have all the pieces that we need that the manufacturer says that should be in the box. Now, that's not to say that someone assembling that has to put a, you know, inspected by so-and-so and stamp on it to make sure that before the box went out, that it had everything that it needed to be able to be assembled properly. But if we're not willing to take the time to make sure, then it's going to be our problem, really. We're not going to be happy about it. We're going to blame the manufacturer. Oh, you did some stuff. But because we didn't take the time to read the manual first to make sure that we had everything that we needed before we started assembling that, then that's where we make the instructions not valid to us, because we're trying to create our own instructions about this particular model or about the blueprint we're supposed to follow in putting it together. Now let's take it down to the level of the Bible in this sense. You know, as Christians, we believe that there's a divine plan for our lives from the Lord, And we believe that the Bible, Old and New, is God's instruction manual for us on how to build and maintain our lives. Now, some of you may not believe that. If you're not reading His Word and you're not spending time in it, then some of this may seem somewhat irrelevant. You know, if you think, well, I've seen people do this before. They open their Bible and they, close their eyes and they point their finger at something, and then they read what they pointed their finger at. It says, "And for tomorrow you shall die." Well, I don't think I'd want to be pointing at that, but that's the way some people read the Bible. They think that God's inspired word is a sit and spin, where you can spin it and hope that it lands on something that you need to receive as a good luck charm for your lives. That's not the way the word works. In Matthew 4:4 it says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." And the Bible is God's word. It was spoken through man as an inspiration and a blueprint for us to be able to live our lives. What do I mean by that? So let's compare God's plan to the things that we deal with every day. So if you're going to build a building, you need blueprints. If you're going to go somewhere, you need directions, you need a map. Well, in this day and age, we have Google Maps. I'm sure there's other software, but still, you're still having to look at a map. You're still having to let your phone direct you and tell you where to go. And how many of you have used Google Maps only to find out that the directions that you already knew in your head how to get to somewhere were taking you the long way around? Or maybe it saw traffic and redirected you. Now, that would be a good thing, but let's just say it takes you the long way around. So really, are the instructions really helping you? Are you just assuming that this is the way you should go? That would be just like in a medical procedure. If doctors weren't trained and taught how to do a procedure, or work with other surgeons or doctors to do procedures, then they're assuming that they know how to do something that they've never been trained to do or even practice doing on someone. Well, I don't mean when I practice, that's why they call it practicing medicine. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of doctors that are more qualified to do things that I will never be able to do. Not to say that I couldn't do them without their help, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Another thing would be like sports. Sports have rule books. And to be able to allow their events to happen, they need to be able to know what the rules are. They don't just go out there with a football and go, "Hey, we're going to throw it anywhere and hope somebody catches it and run." No, they've got a plan. They've got to have taken the time to put things together to do a game plan. That's no different than there's prescriptions on the bottles of the medicine that the doctor orders for you and that you take. And in most cases, the pharmacies ask you questions. Do you have any questions, about how to take this or anything? And again, we're going, "Oh, we got this. We can do this." Only to find out if we would take the time to read the instructions and the pluses and minuses to taking this medicine, we may not even ever open the bottle, but yet we're stuck with it because once you buy it, it's yours. And even in the military has directions and rules too. So what do I say to say all this? There's a schedule to all these things that we do, and that maybe we've even done before. And without these rules and regulations to our life's activity, then we have to realize that God has instructions for us as well in the Bible to follow His plan, because it's really essential for us whether we want to believe it or not. This is clearly seen in the teachings and examples of the Scriptures. And what do I mean by that? When the Egyptians left Egypt, and they went to the mountain where Moses was going up to get the 10 Commandments, they decided they were going to build themselves a calf. A golden one, no doubt, with all the gold and silver that they'd gotten from the Egyptians when they left Egypt. Well, God had already given them instructions. They had a Red Sea open up. They had pillars of fire and smoke to guide them. But I think for some reason or other that they, it's kind of like, they needed to be excited 24/7, like a bunch of little kids being entertained. And I don't want to call them like a bunch of little kids. These were adults. There may have been some children within the mix, but most of them were grown men and women. And these men decided that they were going to build a statue and worship it when they knew that it was unacceptable to God and to His plan. And it was their innovation. We're going to do this and we'll see what happens. And you know what? It cost them their lives. The ground opened up and swallowed some of them up. And if it wouldn't have been for Moses, they would have all died. Because God did, He's a jealous God, but He loves us. But when we're disobedient You know, even like with Cain's sacrifice in the Old Testament, in the Tower of Babel, when they were saying, we're going to build a tower to God, and he made their language go away. You know, those are just a couple of examples of how we're not following God's plan when we try to do it on our own, when we try to do something on our own. Even when they built a tabernacle, God gave specific instruction to them on how they were supposed to put this thing together, what material they were going to use, what gold and silver and cedar and cloth and the design of it and every intricate part. You know, it mentions in Hebrews 8:5, it says, mentions that these words of the priest, it says, we who serve as a copy and shadow of the heavenly things, just as Moses was warned by God when he was about to erect the tabernacle.
Away from where it hit. CBS 2's
He
Quinn
said,
now with more of this incredible video.
What did he say? He said that you make all of this according to the pattern which was shown to you on the mountain. God gave him specific instructions on what to do. He didn't say, hey, just go for it. You know, build me something nice and, you know, I'll like whatever you build. No, that wasn't the case at all. You know, it says in Matthew 16, it says, thine is the kingdom, and thine is the glory. Whatever you do on earth, do it in heaven. And that was God's instructions for them to do that. What is the example for us as God's people? You know, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples as an example in John 13:15, where he said, for I give you an example that you should do as I do to you. Why did he do that? He wanted us to be able to serve. It was a literal point to wash another's feet. It was really kind of more of a cultural thing during that time, because most of the people during that time wore sandals, and they would get dirt and sand on them, and it was the custom for the servant that worked in the house, for the home, to wash the dirt and the sand off of the feet of whoever entered. But Jesus' example here is that we should all have an attitude and actions of this sermon that he said in John 13, 60 through 17, where Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. He didn't just ask. He didn't do it because he was just trying to show himself better, or he wanted to, or he was humbling himself to show us that he didn't come to be served, he came to serve. Even when Peter was addressing the servant's relationship to the master in this particular text, he told them to preserve them and preserve in the faith, that even if they treated themselves, were treated harshly by their masters. The question here is that the slaves may have asked the question like, how should I respond to the authorities when treated this way? He said, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example to follow in his steps. 1 Peter 2:21. Now, what happens when we're disobedient in following God's instructions? Well, we can learn what a positive thing may be as an example of Christ and his followers. The Bible also teaches us through a negative example of disobedience, pointing out that many shortcomings of the Israelites were wrote. Paul said, now these things have happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instructions until or upon whom the ends of the age have come. 1 Corinthians 10:11. You know, I find it really hard that when God expects us to follow his plan, that we don't tend to want to do that. In Exodus 25:40, I want to mention here, it says, see that you make them after the pattern of them, which was shown to you on the mountain. It was clear. There was no missing parts to what God said. Everything was assembled properly because of what he had explained to them that needed to be done. The detail that we have about the tabernacle and about what God expected is down to the nut and bolt. And not only how it was built and assembled, but erected, and the order in which it was supposed to be done. There was no question with anyone on how it was to be done. Even in the New Testament, in 2 Thessalonians 2:15, it says, "So then, brother, stand firm and hold to these traditions which you were taught, whether by word of mouth or letters from us." What does that mean? The Bible was written for our health and for our wealth. It's rich. It's full of riches that we could never imagine, treasures beyond our wildest dreams. But during Jesus' time, they told stories, and if people were willing to follow Christ, these stories are what bound them together and what kept them from doing things that they knew were wrong. Did that say that they didn't sin or not, or they were perfect? No. But it did say that in 2 Thessalonians 3:7 says, "For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example." Paul was giving them a clear example. He was given an example by Peter and everyone else that he had either been taught under or had heard from and been taught. That's why most of the New Testament was written by Paul. And even though he had a lot of information, it was kind of ironic that God used him, a scholar that, in this day and time, he probably had, 25 doctorates, and, he probably had, 15 PhDs. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but Paul was a very learned man. And for Christ to get his attention, I don't think he could have picked anyone else better. Paul was willing to follow the rules in the Bible to the letter of the law. And he didn't have the written word, but what he had was he had a knowledge. And God had given him that to speak it out, to make an understanding, even through all the things that he went to. Now, what do I say in regard to that as Christians and how we live? In Philippians 3:16 through 17, it says, "Let us keep living by that same standard which we have obtained. Brothers, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us." And according to that, regarding this, the mindset of that. In Philippians 4:9, it says the things that we have learned and received, we've heard, we've seen it in me. Practice these things, and God of peace will be with you. Wow, that's pretty strong thing. Let me give you another example of this. Let's say that you have come across some money and you want to invest in the stock market. Do you just blatantly go out and give your money to a stockbroker and say, "Hey, invest this to the best of your knowledge and keep me abreast of that, and I have faith in you"? I don't think that most of us would do that. Now, maybe if it was someone that we knew, we may have a little bit more trust, but I'm hoping that we're not just that naive to assume that the people that we give our money to is going to work. I'll give you another scripture that kind of tells us that, how we fail without having proper instructions. In Nahum 1:9, it says, "Whatever you devise against the Lord," that means doing it your way, "He will make it a complete end." He'll end it. You'll lose all your money. But if we're listening to God and we've been sealed by the great physician, the great healer, the person that took our sins on and saved our sick souls from death, He's got a plan for our well-being. Let me say this to you. God's plans aren't selfish. It's not like saying like you're a puppet on a leash or a string or whatever, and that you're going to just give up everything that you know or have learned or been taught to be able to serve God. Let me say this to you. Every command that He gives in the Bible is for our benefit, for us as His people. We may have a difficult time seeing it that way and believing it, but every command that God gives you in the Bible is good for you. It's good for Him. It's good for me. I wouldn't be here now if it was for that, because the devil's big job is to lie to you and deceive you, because Jesus even said that the devil is a father of lies. It said that in John 8:44. Now let me share something else with you that kind of goes in coincide of this, because we already know that God's got a future for us. He's got a plan. David even wrote that down in the Psalms. In Psalms 119:18, he says, "Open my eyes that I may behold the wonderful things from your law." What is the law there for? The law is not to condemn us. Now, we may feel condemned to some degree after we try to say we're trying to follow the law, like not committing adultery, not coveting someone else's materials or wife or family, or stealing or lying or doing things that are not of God. Whether you follow God or not, you shouldn't do those things anyway. And that's an instruction in itself. It's the law of the land. Now, we've kind of loosened our lips on some of those things and allowed them to kind of get out of the path of which God has given us, and stop using those examples, stop living them for that matter. It's sad. You know, if we would get into a relationship with the Bible, which is God's Word, that gets us in a relationship with God, because we start to learn and understand and live it. I'll say this to you. It's time for us to take our eyes off of the confusion, the misleading input that we get from watching TV and the internet, which dulls our senses and receiving things that are not good for us from the outside world. And we need to concentrate on the truth and what we trust in to guide us to our destination, which in this case is heaven. Heaven is our destination. And God's given us the Bible as an instruction to lead us to Him, to His will for our life. Let me just say this, God's Word is an instruction book. I think something you may have heard some people say the Bible actually basic instructions before leaving earth. I truly believe that. A lot of people say, well, there's things in the Bible that are not, can be related to in today's time. And I will tell you that while you may try to find words and things that people do today that are not sin, it's still sin. You can call it what you want. And I'm sure in some ways there's an example in there of something that you may think that's not in the Bible that you're doing. I'll give you the example. When you choose to do things your way, live your life the way you think you should live it, regardless of what you believe is true or morally correct, you're sinning against God. You're not only deceiving yourself, but you're lying to yourself. And if you would take the time, coward, that's why God gives us free will, to sit down, read the Bible for yourself, don't worry about what anybody else says. Ask God to give you the wisdom. I think that's in James 1:7, where it says, if you lack wisdom, ask for it, God will give it to you. Now, if you're not a believer, then asking God for wisdom sometimes may not be. But if that's what He needs to do to get your attention, or to get you to some kind of understanding of what He wants you to do while you're here, breathing the free air that you have, that He produced on this earth, then that would be my conviction to you. My plight to you is to take that time to look. Let me just say this to you. We all have families. We all have our own little idiosyncrasies in our behaviors. We all have a job of some sort to do, no matter whether it's working at McDonald's or the president of Microsoft. Some of us are married, some of us are not. And for those that are married, marriage, while it's a loving covenant, it's still a love.
Can lightning strike the same place twice? Let's figure out what makes it happen in the first place. Lightning is electricity, and electricity involves tiny particles. Some particles have a positive charge, and some have a negative charge.
Let me say this.
The two opposite charges pull towards each other, like the north and south ends of magnets. Usually, electric charges are fairly balanced, but the turbulent winds of a storm cause electric charges to separate within the cloud. Most lightning occurs within the cloud itself, but we're concerned about the lightning between clouds and the ground. Lightning starts with negative charges moving from the clouds towards the ground. Scientists call it a stepped leader. Meanwhile, an upward leader forms as positive charges move up from the ground, usually from tall objects. When a stepped leader and an upward leader meet, it makes a path for a much larger and brighter electric current to shoot up into the cloud. This is what we see in the sky as lightning. It happens so quickly that lightning seems to travel from the cloud to the ground, when in fact the opposite is true. So, can lightning strike the same place twice? Absolutely. For example, Toronto CN Tower is struck by lightning around 75 times each year. In fact, in August 2011, the tower was shocked a record-breaking 52 times in 84 minutes. But don't worry,
on
The
toll-free
tower was
number.
built to
Hopefully there's one
withstand
there, or maybe
it.
there's a
So
support
it's a
line,
safe place to
and
be if
connect
lightning
it with them and
strikes
say, hey,
once,
I'm missing this
twice,
part. Maybe
or
you
even
send them a picture of
52
what you're
times.
missing. And I know that if their customer service is worthy of what it should be, they will apologize for the inconvenience. They may even send you a discount coupon for the next piece of furniture you buy, and also send you some more extra parts that you're going to wind up either throwing in a bag somewhere. And your wife's going, why are you keeping those? You don't need those. You're not going to unassemble it, reassemble it again, are you? No, you won't. Once you got it assembled, those parts aren't needed anymore, and you can throw them away. Let me share one last thing with you. If you've never just now, you are now a part of the family. Welcome. I would encourage you to find a church close to you. I would encourage you to get your hands on a Bible and start looking up, if you were writing anything down, some of the scriptures that I share with you about God's instruction booklet, or how to read the instruction booklet for that matter, and some examples of the things that I share with you about what went on and how you can change your life just by doing that. I would also encourage you, since you're listening to Lightning Ministries International, and God has given us a plan to do that, what we're doing for you, I would ask you to consider planting a seed within the ministry, or giving us a donation at whatever level you would like, or maybe partnering with us on a monthly basis so that we can move a little quicker forward in what God has already given us to do. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I encourage you to listen to this as many times as you want. Inside the description on this sermon, there will be notes. There will also be a phone number, an email address. I encourage you to reach out to us. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I'll assure you this, I'm not perfect. And if I don't have an answer for your question, I'll find the answer. Hopefully it's the right one, and I'll get it to you as soon as possible. I want to thank you again for listening, and have a blessed day, or evening, or night, whatever time it may be where you're at. Thanks.